Hey everybody, I'm Vera Stewart and welcome to the VeryVera show. You know, there's nothing finer than the smell of onions. And for all you newlyweds out there, my grandmother told me when I got married, if I just put an onion on the stove before my husband came home from work, he would think he was having a gourmet meal. So I certainly recommend that as a tip. But on this wonderful fall night, we're going to do three great dishes. I'm going to do a pork crostini. That's a great appetizer, very easy, very delicious and different. Then we're going to do a stuffed meatloaf with cheeses and a great sauce. And then finally, a wilted green salad that you put a fried egg on top. So really different recipes. And what I'm working on right now is the relish that's going to go on top of this pork crostini. So I've had a little bit of olive oil in the pan. Then I added a clove of garlic, and as you can see, the onions are just starting to wilt down, get nice and golden brown. And now I'm going to add about 2½ cups of really thinly sliced red cabbage. And this is going to go in along with a ½ cup of chicken stock. And if you don't have chicken stock handy, you know, it's always nice to either have the prepared base in the refrigerator that you can just add water to. But I'm going to turn the heat up on this, and this is just going to start to cook down and be the top on these little crostini appetizers that are just great this time of year. All right, so the spread that's going to go on top of the crostini is a combination of cream cheese, and I've got about 6 ounces of cream cheese here that I'm letting come to room temperature. I'm going to add to that 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise. And then, like I always say when I use fresh herbs for something, I love to do that at the absolute last minute. And you know, Fresh Market always has all of the different seasonings on the shelf, and if you keep it good and airtight, it'll last for several weeks. But this is fresh thyme, and I like to chop it up at the very last minute so it really adds that wonderful not only aroma, but also that just the great taste of that thyme coming through. So I want to do about a tablespoon of this. And if the stems are kind of hard on it, just kind of take your knife and pull those away so all you have is the green leaf. A lot of times you'll have some tender parts as well as that. All right, so I'm going to add this to the mixture. And this is what is going to spread on top of the crostini, and we're going to do that a little later in the show, but I just wanted to get this ready. All right, so I'm going to let that sit and continue to come to room temperature. And let's see how this cabbage is doing over here. You know, red cabbage is just great this time of year, not only for the color, but it's just a great fall vegetable. All right, and as I said, this is a sweet and sour recipe. So at this point, once it's kind of started to wilt down, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar, and then 2 tablespoons of a really good brown sugar. And you know, I'll give you a little secret. When people ask you for the recipes, if you don't always name your brands, if they say, well, you know, I made that recipe, but it wasn't quite as good as when you make it, you know, I really love to use very, very good ingredients in my foods. And if there is a really upscale brand of something, I try to put that, even if it's only a tablespoon, it really does make a difference. All right, so that's going to continue to cook down. And I'm going to pull the pork tenderloin out of the oven. It should be just about ready. Ooh. And this cooked in a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes. And what I did to this was I made a kind of a paste out of garlic and olive oil and coarsely ground salt and pepper. And I sprayed the bottom of the pan. Then you just put the tenderloins in the pan and take a pastry brush and sweep that over the top and just let it cook. We're going to let that cool down. We're going to continue to cook this cabbage down. And when we come back after the break, I'm going to be putting together everything that goes into the best meatloaf you ever had. So come back with us. Welcome back, and I'm ready to get started on that meatloaf, and I hope that meatloaf is maybe something you'd like to put on a fall menu. So let me pull the hamburger meat out of the refrigerator. And you know, I went by the fresh market, and I love it when they have, you know, a lot of times on like Tuesdays they'll have buy something get something free. I was actually able to pick the pork tenderloin up that way, but they were grinding sweet Italian sausage that day, and I was so happy. So this meatloaf is going to use 1.5 pounds of ground chuck and 1/2 pound of ground Italian sweet sausage. So I'm going to go ahead and get both of those in the bowl. And then I actually made one ahead because I wanted you, there's so many steps to this recipe, I wanted to make sure that you saw all the components of how we put it together. So I'm going to grab the one that's in the oven right now. You know, I always get nervous when I'm doing stuff for TV. I'm just hoping it's going to turn out really good. But this is one that's almost halfway done. And as you can see, some of the cheese is starting to ooze out, but you'll be able to lift that up when you get it off the pan. But I want to go ahead and put the sauce on top, and I'm going to show you how to make this in a minute. But you're probably thinking, why has she got that in a can? Well, one of the tricks to this recipe is that you use the things that you're using, and I'm going to use 1/2 can of this sauce when I make the actual meatloaf, and the recipe for the sauce calls for 1/2 can of the tomato sauce, so you just mix it up right in the can. So I am pouring this over, and it's a combination of tomato sauce, prepared mustard, brown sugar, and vinegar. And I'm going to put this back in the oven for about 20 to 30 minutes. So let's pop that back in the oven real fast. I think all the guys in the neighborhood are going to be coming over to eat dinner tonight. Okay, so now I've got the ground beef, and I'm going to add to that a cup of breadcrumbs. And you can use panko or you can use really finely chopped, whichever you prefer. I'm going to use an egg. Remember, 1/2 can of the tomato sauce. And then we'll use the other 1/2 of the can for the sauce that goes on top. So just kind of approximate that. And then about 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt. And then I like to use, in this recipe, I actually like to use really finely ground pepper instead of the coarse ground. So I'm going to put about 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. And then on the Worcestershire sauce, the recipe says to use 2 tablespoons, but I kind of like just to eyeball it. And if you don't like Worcestershire sauce, you can actually substitute A1 or Heinz or whatever favorite steak sauce that you may have. So this is the part where you have to get in there with your hands and, you know, maybe taking the meat out of the refrigerator a few minutes before you're ready to do this process. You know, sometimes it's so cold it freezes your hands. But you want to make sure that you mix it up really, really well. And let me tell you a little bit about why I did the meatloaf today on a broiling pan. You know, one of my memories of my mother making meatloaf was having to have her take it out of the oven and drain all the fat off of it and put it back in, and she was, you know, using a loaf pan. And, you know, if you use a broiling pan, it's going to actually make the meat a little bit leaner. But you have to watch and make sure that it's not getting too dried out. So on the stove, I have got, I'm cooking down an onion, and I'm also cooking down baby portobello mushrooms. And when I do the jelly roll with this, all of that's going to go in the center along with the cheeses. So I've just about got this mixed up all the way. You know, if you don't like Italian sausage and you like kind of a kick, you could actually substitute, you know, maybe a ground hot sausage. All right, so under the bowl, I've got a piece of parchment paper. And I'm just going to tape my hands one more time and just kind of make sure that this is really cohesive. And then I'm going to get the process started. What I'm trying to do is to form a rectangle that I can put all of these yummy ingredients and then roll it up like a jelly roll. So this is parchment paper, but you can use wax paper. But what you want to use is something that when you get ready to do the rolling process, which we're going to do after the break, that it's going to come off the paper very easily. The other way that you can do this is to take another piece of the paper and a rolling pin and just start rolling it out as well. So when we come back from the break, I'm going to have the perfect rectangle, and we're going to start putting all the yummy ingredients in the center. So come back with me. Smelling good in here. You know, we all love to receive invitations, and certainly a wedding invitation can be extremely tricky from the recipient side as well as from the sender. So let's go over a few tips. If the invitation is addressed on the outside to Mr. and Mrs., what you need to pay close attention to is how the inside envelope reads. If it just reads Mr. and Mrs. Kilpatrick, then if there are any children in that home, they are not invited. If it does read Mr. and Mrs. Kilpatrick and has all the names of the children listed, then they are invited to the wedding. The same thing is true if a single lady is invited to the wedding. Let's look at her inside envelopes. If it just says Miss McLeod, then she is invited alone. If it has Miss McLeod and guest, then she is free to ask someone to go with her. So just remember, cue in your etiquette tips, look at it online if you need it fresh, but pay attention to that envelope when you receive an invitation. Welcome back. Are y'all having fun? I'm having fun. I just love doing this. I love fall cooking, and it just really, some of these recipes, you know, take me pretty far back, and I'm having a great time. But when we left, I was rolling out the meatloaf, and as you can see, I took the rolling pin, and it's pretty close to the perfect rectangle. Looks pretty good. And now is where the fun begins. We're going to get everything together. This is where you can bring your young person in with you and let them get involved in putting all the good stuff on top. So I sauteed some Vidalia onion. So now I'm going to put that right in the center. And we're just going to evenly distribute that. And this is why I didn't put onions in the meat. A lot of times when I'm doing that in a loaf pan, I'll cut up the onions and put in the actual meat. All right, but I love that grilled flavor you get when you do them this way. Then I've got the baby portobello mushrooms. I'm going to do those the same way. And this is just already looking scrumptious. And if you'll just kind of disperse them around, it's all going to come together when it rolls up. All right, now this is my play on cheese. How many of you will buy cheese for a dish and not use it all, and then all of a sudden, there it is molded in the refrigerator? So, you know, pull out that ricotta cheese that you used last week to make lasagna and use it for this if you have it. So this part of the recipe, you can just use whatever you've got. So I had some provolone cheese that I'm just going to distribute through it. And then I also had some mozzarella. So I'm going to put that in. You don't want to get it so fat that it won't roll. So I know we all love cheese. And then let's put a little bit of that ricotta cheese on there too, because that'll make it kind of creamy. So I'm just going to dollop this in a couple of different places. You know, and if you wanted to do something like add spinach at this point or grated carrots, you know, whatever else you wanted to put in there vegetable-wise, you could certainly do that too. All right, now it's just about ready to to do the rolling up process. So at this point, you take that wax paper, and I'm using parchment paper, and you get the roll started. And then you just want to ease the paper away and just begin the rolling up. And it just, you know, the nice thing about it is if it starts to come apart, you just push it back together. So this will just roll up, and then we're going to seal the ends when we get ready. But what I really like to do is I like to make this the day before, because it's almost like it firms up if it sits in this roll overnight. So when you get to this part, you just kind of sit it on that seam and just take whatever cheese or whatever came out of the end, and then you're basically just going to mash those ends together. And now we'll use this parchment paper as the sealant to wrap it up. Like I'm just going to take it and I'm going to roll it right back just like it was. And then I'll cover this with aluminum foil and let that sit in the refrigerator overnight, and it'll be ready to bake tomorrow just like the one I baked a few minutes ago. All right, so that's good to go. Now we've got a salad that we're going to put together, and I've sauteed some more onions. This show was all about onions tonight, but there's nothing better. And I'm going to add a green. This is chard and spinach and kale. And this is going to cook down. You know, it's just like any time you do these sorts of greens, it looks like you're feeding the multitudes, but when we come back from the break, you'll see that this is cooked down to a very minor bit. So I'm going to be adding some almonds and sherry, and I've actually got some butternut squash in the oven that I'm roasting. So when we come back from the break, I'm going to be plating up this wonderful salad, cooking an egg to go on top, getting the meatloaf sliced, and putting that pork and those caramelized onions on top of the crostini for an appetizer. So I hope you'll join me. You don't want to miss this. Come back after the break. Welcome back, and I know I'm ready to have a fall dinner party, and I hope you are too. So I'm working on the crostini, the appetizer, which will be the first course when you get ready to do this meal. But we have the little French baguette rounds that were toasted, and if you run out of time, they have them already done for you at the fresh market. So I'm using those today. I did a mixture of cream cheese and mayonnaise and fresh thyme, and then I'm going to top it with a piece of the pork tenderloin that we roasted at 350 with a garlic and olive oil marinade on the top. And then let's top it off with the red cabbage sweet and sour, and then we can put just a little sprig of the fresh thyme on the top. And doesn't that make a great looking appetizer platter? Really colorful. I've got it on a copper tray, so that's ready to go for your appetizer. So let's move down here and get going on the dinner. And you know, I always am looking for different ways to display food, and you know, it's kind of fun. You end up collecting platters. I know I do in my family, and you know, a meal like this could be served on a platter or a large charger. So I'm using a platter today. So the greens that we were doing before we went to the break was chard and kale and fresh spinach. So what we're doing here is, instead of having a crisp cold salad, we're having a wilted fall salad. So I'm going to add to that butternut squash that I had cubed. I just tossed it with a little bit of olive oil and sea salt, and just roasted it in the oven for about 20 minutes. So I'm going to toss that in there with that. And it isn't that colorful, so we'll put a little of this on the platter. So that's going to be the side dish for this meal. And it's just the butternut squash are kind of crispy still. I didn't overcook those. So that's going to look great. And then what about this wonderful meatloaf that has that swirl of cheese and mushrooms and onions? We certainly want to make sure we get a hearty piece of that. So let's lay that halfway across. And then remember that extra sauce, just heat that up. Just kind of pour a little bit over it. And then we actually didn't use all the cheese either, so I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of that on the top. And you have a wonderful fall dinner party. So, I just love doing these recipes. I love looking at some of the old recipes that I have and trying to put a new spin on it, like cooking meatloaf on a broiler pan instead of in a loaf pan. So when you're getting your meals together, just remember to think about color, something that's maybe a little different, and get your house decorated. This time of year, it's so wonderful with pumpkins and just the orange and the fall colors. And my friends over at Three Monkeys in Aiken have got the cutest things. I mean, what a great party favor if you're a bride and someone's entertaining for you this fall. Something cute like this that they can pull out every year, put on a chair in the living room would just be precious. So I want you to remember them. They've been so good to me. On the salad, the last thing you want to do before you serve it, breakfast is the new dinner. We're going to top that salad with a fried egg. And when you do this, if you need to do it ahead, if you'll just cook them so they're kind of like sunny side, you can keep them in a warming drawer, and then by the time it's ready to put them on the plate, they're ready to go. I want to remind everyone that I'm back to doing my cooking classes with children. We'll be doing one every month on a Saturday. If you want more information, you can go to my website at VeryVera.com. And again, all the recipes are on the NBC26 website at NBC26.tv, The Very Vera Show. So I hope you'll try these recipes. I hope your fall is turning out to be as great as mine. And remember, whatever you do, do it in good taste, and that's what folks will say if you prepare this meal for your next fall dinner party.